Welcome to the show. Hey, we've got a new aspect to the show. It's video, and it's my weekly sit down with Eric Peters. Those of you who've been listening to him for years, now you have an idea of what the guy looks like. Eric, great to have you on the program.
Oh, likewise, Brian. Hey, you've got proof of life, unless it's AI.
Yeah, no, I want to see you hold up a recent newspaper. Let's make sure that we're dealing with this. Oh, and how many fingers does he have? Yeah, he looks like he's okay. No, I'm really happy that we're able to do this video portion. Although I'm going to admit I've kind of been I've been relegated to the I guess purgatory studio, where this is not my normal studio, but I don't care. It's more important that you and I have a chance to chat about some of the things that are going on. Let's start with rumors about the Orange Man's untimely demise. I wasn't even
Yeah.
aware this was a thing, but was this burning down social media?
Well, over the course of the last 4 days or so, Trump seems to have more or less disappeared from public view. And that's interesting because it's unusual for him. Unlike his predecessor, Trump seemed to relish being out in front of the cameras, making public appearances. And for one reason or another, we don't know exactly why, his appearances have dialed back considerably. And the only known appearance of him was him sort of shuffling out of the White House into a limo, and he didn't look so good. Now, those things are all speculative. What we know for sure is that he has a chronic venous insufficiency, and also that he's got something going on with his hands have these blotches on them. You see sometimes elderly people who are on blood thinners will have that. They tend to bruise very easily. And both of these things are indicative of potentially serious underlying conditions. And while he may not be dead and there may not be anything catastrophically wrong with him, I got to thinking about it, and I got to doing a little bit of historical retrospective. And I recalled that Trump right now is older than Brezhnev was, for those who remember the old Soviet Union, when Brezhnev died, not when he was in
The
charge, not
eyebrows.
when he assumed the role of leader of the Soviet Union, but when he died. And not only that, Trump is older than both of Brezhnev's successors, Comrade Andropov and Comrade Chernenko. Another data point, Ronald Reagan was considered too old to be president when he was elected in 1980. Ronald Reagan was 69 years old when he was elected in 1980.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Oh man.
this, I'm not disparaging older people. My point is that we have sort of gotten to the point that the Soviet Union was in the late 70s and the early 80s, and that we have this gerontocracy. It's not just Trump. Pelosi's another example. Nadler. There's several of the other ones. These ossified old people that are just clinging desperately to power. And there are additional parallels. It seems like this country is on the ropes too, just like the Soviet Union was back in the late 70s and the early 80s. And at the same time, we're told by our ossified leaders that everything is fine, everything is great. Well, it's not great. As anybody knows who goes shopping, it's not great. $100 buys you two plastic bags of groceries, maybe. Your car insurance has gone up by 40%. Everything has gone up by double digits. So it's not good. And where are we going from here? And what's going to happen next? I don't know, but I guess we're going to find out.
Well, and feeding that rumor, as far as well, is Trump in bad health? Apparently, he's making an announcement at 2 o'clock Eastern time today, and there's a lot of to do about, and they've cordoned off the area around Walter Reed Medical Center, and I'm intrigued. I didn't know much about it, but now I'm kind of wondering, what that might all be about.
Well, it wouldn't be surprising. Bottom line, the man is almost 80. And, the fact is, when you get to that age, anything can happen. My mom passed last November, and, I saw an immense deterioration in her during the last 3 years of her life, because that's what happens sometimes, usually when people get into their 80s. So, it's a cautionary tale. It's ironic that one of the things that prompted people to vote for Trump was that they were concerned about having what appeared to be a man who was in physical and mental decline as president. And, without even touching on the man's politics, he was just looking feeble. And people
Mhm.
were troubled about the idea of having a feeble guy, the putative president of the United States. And now, 8 months into the new presidency, we may be in exactly the same situation again.
Oh, and there have been predictable calls for, well, we need to remove him under the 25th Amendment, figure out what's going on. It's coming from the Democrats, but
Mhm.
for what it's worth, these are the same ones who insisted Joe Biden was, fit as a fiddle, and there was nothing to question there. I guess the default setting most of us should have by now is don't trust anything any politician says from any party.
Well, absolutely. And doesn't it speak to the just fundamental dishonesty of the times that we live in? And it transcends parties. The Democrats, the left, they were incredibly dishonest about Biden's deterioration, making all sorts of apologies for it blatantly right in our faces when we could see with our own lying eyes that the man was in decline. And it seems like, and I'm not saying it's a certainty, I'm just saying it seems like the same thing is kind of potentially happening now with Trump.
Talk to me about what you have heard recently regarding the resignations and firings at the Centers for Disease Control.
Really interesting. And let me preface this with Trump's tweet of the other day, in which he, on the one hand, seemed to be questioning whether Operation Warp Speed was a good thing, and then on the other, leaving him room to say it was a bad thing. He has a brilliant in his own way of manipulating words to leave himself not culpable for anything. It's evident again, unless the man is senile, it's evident to everybody that that was a bad idea. Not just the pushing of untested drugs on people, but the literal pushing of them onto people. I harp on that a lot because I think it's important. I don't think there would be nearly as much controversy about the so-called vaccines if the pharmaceutical companies had simply offered them and said, look, we've developed these vaccines. If you'd like to take them, here they are. It was never about that. It was, we're going to make you take them. And the pharmaceutical companies use the government as their Luca Brasi, the enforcer in The Godfather, to push people into taking. That's the core of the problem here. And Trump has yet to acknowledge that. And I hope that he does acknowledge it. Even at this point, I'm willing to forgive the man if he acknowledges it. I think it's very,
Right.
very important that he do that.
And I'm seeing actually, I'm going to say this not to suggest you and I are fringe, but I'm seeing even some of the mainstream commentators saying, could it be that Trump is finally recognizing he was given bad information? He was all in. And I don't doubt, given his ego, he probably was looking forward to being seen as a savior. Oh, look
Yeah.
at what he made
Yeah.
happen. I mean, he's bragged about it and bragged about it. But if it's true that the CDC gave him faulty information or that Pfizer gave him inflated numbers showing how good it was, then yeah, it doesn't need to stop with just his mea culpa. We need that,
Absolutely.
but criminal charges need to come. Heads need to roll because I can't think of a bigger crime within recent memory against a greater section of humanity.
Yeah, nor I. And I think that that's a very important point. It's not enough that Trump comes out and says, "Look, I was misled. I made a bad decision, and I own it, and I'm sorry that I did that." Implicit in that is that the people who did mislead him and who pushed this on people and who did know, Trump can plausibly say, "Hey, look, I'm a politician. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an epidemiologist or a virologist. I was told this by these so-called experts that this was a safe and effective way to deal with this pandemic, this problem." The people at Pfizer, people like Borla, these people are experts in their field. They're the ones who hands-on were the ones who were manufacturing these things. They knew perfectly well what was going on with them. And yet they, with knowledge, continued to sell the lie to people. That's criminal. And that requires that they be held accountable. And I don't mean just, in some way censured publicly. Like you, I think that they should be put into the dock, prosecuted criminally, and that there should be severe consequences for what they've done.
Agreed. And I have further frustration with outlets like the New York Times and other legacy media outlets that for some bizarre reason still believe that if they insist, oh well, the biggest threat to public health is what Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing. They actually they actually think we're stupid enough to believe what they're publishing after what we've seen with our own eyes and experienced over the
Mhm.
last 5 years.
Well, the irony is that they don't seem to be able to comprehend that they are responsible for the utter devastation of public confidence in entities such as the CDC. If it hadn't been for all of this stuff, people might still say, okay, I'm willing to trust them because their record entitles them to trust. They seem to have acted in the public interest before, not perfectly, but they seem to have acted in the public interest. So on balance, I regard them as trustworthy. Now you have to be an imbecile to trust anything that these people say. And that's on them. That's not on us. And, for the New York Times to not understand that is really remarkable.
Well, and they portray, these people who have, starting with the CDC head, who I think it was Morenz. She was fired last week, but a whole bunch stepped down, and one of them, who I guess was making the rounds on ABC's news program, Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis. was insisting, well, what's happened is the wall between science and ideology is being broken down. But if people look at what this guy is and what he has said, do you remember the monkeypox outbreak back in
Of course,
2022?
of course.
We're not supposed to call it monkeypox
Yeah.
because somehow that's considered racist. Although I don't know why people say that, but it's almost exclusively spread by you know uh,
But love.
yes, aberrant behavior between homosexual men. But we were hearing, oh, but kids and animals are coming down with it. We have to do something. And here's this same Dr. Daskalakis on ABC News talking about, well, we don't want to intrude on people's joy, and we don't want to talk about it just in terms of risk. I mean, what some people say is risky is just a Friday night for others. That's the same guy who's telling us that, well, they're doubting the science. But
I
he,
think the
he
core problem here is the same problem that we dealt with in the aftermath of World War II, which was this mixing of government and science. There was everybody knows about the Nuremberg trials, where the political leaders of the Third Reich were held to account for what they did. But there were subsequent trials called the Doctor trials, where the Reich's leading scientists and medical people were also put on trial for doing awful things to people using the government and in collusion with the government. That's the problem. I
Yep.
believe in a free market when it comes to things like this, meaning, okay, you got something to offer people that's a benefit to them. People are going to go for it of their own free will if it's actually of benefit to them. Was it von Mises or a classic libertarian once said something that, like along the lines of, good ideas don't need guns. And there's a lot
Yes.
of truth to that. Get the government out of this business. The fundamental business of government is not to push things on people. It is to leave us free to make our decisions according to our own best judgment, to leave us alone. That's the proper role of government, to protect our rights. And one of the most important rights is bodily autonomy, to decide what makes sense for yourself and your family, as opposed to having some government goon try to force you to do something not only to yourself, but potentially to your kids as well.
And especially when they're doing it in the name of science. And
Yep.
again, going back to this Dr. Daskalakis, I know it's a he him because he put his pronouns in his resignation letter. He can't even refer to uh, mothers or women. He talks about birthing people. And this is the guy who tells us science is under attack by Trump when he can't even connect with reality.
There's another thing that's related to this. I'm glad we got on this tangent because I think it's important. I read something about the government seeking to allow what they call a grace exemption. Have you heard about this
I
at
have not.
universities and colleges, which would essentially formalize? During the pandemic, people would say, "Well, according to my religious beliefs, I don't wish to be vaccinated." It shouldn't be that. Now, that's important. People do have, I believe, they've got a right to the integrity of their religious beliefs, but that's beside the point. Everybody has a right to not be diddled with,
Yeah.
that I mean, to not be a guinea pig, to not be a rat for somebody else's experimentation. You shouldn't have to beg for an exemption. It should be opt in rather than opt out. If you want a treatment, by all means, go ahead and get it. Informed consent. Those are the core issues here.
I was actually reading an account on X earlier this morning from a J6 defendant who said, he was forced by a judge to take the jab, meaning he could not appear in the courtroom. He was basically he was forced against his will. The judge later actually admitted, yes, I violated your constitutional rights. Well, now he's having severe health problems,
Mm-hmm.
and so how do you how do
How do you
you
walk that back?
is there any way to make that right?
Not really. I mean, certain things are irreparable. Rape is irreparable. You violate a person in that way, and that's with them for the rest of their lives. And that's why this is such a serious matter, and that's why it needs to be dealt with seriously. I think this country, the society, has been massively traumatized by the events of the past 4 or 5 years, and I don't think that it will be over until there is accountability. There has to be a cleansing, a national cleansing, and not just for the sake of holding those people accountable, but to send a message down the line to the future that this sort of thing cannot and will not happen again.
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm going to be optimistic and hope that some of the rats fleeing the sinking ship at the CDC aren't just pulling the cord on their golden parachute and ready to go to the comfy paycheck waiting for them in an advisory capacity at some pharmaceutical company. But I do hope that accountability comes. Let's talk automotive. I
Yeah.
saw your article about why buy a new car.
Yeah.
And this is a discussion my wife and I are having because all of our cars are now starting to age and we're starting to see the maintenance pile up. And it would just be cheaper to buy a new car. And I'd love to get your take on people who are asking that question. Why do they need to, what are the terms in which they need to frame that kind of a question?
Well, let's set the premise. For, I don't know, the last 100 years up until about 10 years ago, it made obvious sense to buy a new car because generally speaking, you got a better vehicle. In other words, you got a vehicle that was reliable, that you could count on for years without having to worry about anything major going wrong with it. So it made sense. The shiny paint was nice. Maybe the better stereo was nice. But the bottom line was, you got rid of a vehicle that had gotten kind of crickety, that wasn't reliable and durable anymore, that maybe is going to leave you stranded somewhere for one that wouldn't. That's no longer true. Durability and reliability are going in the wrong direction now with new cars. New cars are commonly having not just little glitches and problems here and there, but catastrophic problems. I cite two examples. One from Toyota, and that's devastating because Toyota used to be the blue chip standard. You wanted a reliable car. If that was your primary concern, you wanted a well-built, reliable car, you got a Toyota. And there was good reason for that because until quite recently, you could probably expect to drive that Toyota for the next 25 years if you wanted to, without ever having to worry about anything major going wrong with it. Well, when Toyota, for compliance reasons, got rid of some of its more reliable engines, and specifically, I mean, its wonderful V8 engine that it used to put into models like the Land Cruiser and the Tundra pickup, and put a turbo hybrid V6 in place of it. Well, they had to recall all of them because there was a defect with these engines. They weren't reliable. They failed. Similarly, Cadillac, General Motors, which uses a 6.2 liter V8 in the Escalade, which is a $100,000 vehicle. This is like a premium top of the line vehicle. Catastrophic, complete, total engine failure, sometimes within hours of delivery. I personally know a person who bought one of these things, and 4 weeks after they bought it, the bottom end of the engine grenaded.
Wow.
And who wants to deal with that? It doesn't matter that, oh, it's under warranty. Well, what good does that do you? You don't have a vehicle. And now you're going to wrangle and haggle with rental cars, with loaner cars, with this and that, letters back and forth, calls and emails. You just want the freaking thing to work.
Not
And
to mention, will you ever really truly trust it again?
you can't. You can't, particularly, okay, it's not just that the engine, the replacement engine may have the same problem. The way new cars are, they are so complicated and so integrated with everything. When you pull an engine out of a new car, you're talking about disconnecting lots of wiring harnesses, sensors, components. And if everything isn't connected exactly just right going back in, the likelihood of you having another problem is pretty high. So
I ca-
there's that issue. And then there are all these just gadgets and gimmicks that they're putting in new cars to justify the increase, and they're of no meaningful benefit that I can see to you and me as a potential purchaser. So keyless ignition is a good example of that. Okay, so you tell me, what is the advantage to having a button that you push and this fob that you keep in your pocket or purse, as opposed to a physical key? Is it really that difficult to take a key, put it in an ignition lock, and turn it? Now, mind you, that ignition key, I can leave it in my pants pocket, and if I forget about it and it goes through the wash, it's going to be just fine. And if I lose it, it's $10 to replace it. Price a key fob. Some of these
oh
key
yeah.
fobs are $300 or more a piece. It's crazy. So now you hold that on one hand of on one side of the ledger. The other thing that's important is that vehicles made since roughly the mid late 90s all the way through about 2005, they're wonderfully modern in every sense. If you get into, assuming it's in sound mechanical condition, you can get into a 20-year-old car and it runs and drives as well or even better than a brand new car because it doesn't have all this over-the-top elaborate stuff in it that makes a car glitchy. I've got a 24-year-old truck outside, and it's fuel injected and it has air conditioning and it's totally reliable, runs and drives just as well as, in many cases, better than the new cars I test drive every week. So what's the advantage? Okay, it doesn't have a great radio, or it didn't, but I put in a modern radio for $160. And now I've got a radio that's just about as good as most of the radios that come in the new cars, but I don't have advanced safety assistance technology. I don't
Mm.
have a computer that's like sending out updates and receiving telemetry and narking me out to the government and the insurance mafia. So at the end of the day, I'll keep my old car. And I think that message is being received loud and clear by a lot of people out there.
I caught a video the other day from a guy who apparently has been wrenching on Hondas for a long time. And he said, it is by no means unusual to see people bring in a 250, 300,000 mile Honda that is still in just excellent condition because it's been well maintained and they really were built to last. But he said, newer models, and I kind of held my breath because we have a 2016 Honda Pilot. He says, starting in about 2016, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
rats. But he says the transmission, you used to be able to buy parts to fix the transmission, no more. He says when
Yep.
something fails, you have to buy the whole enchilada, the whole transmission from Honda, which, much more expensive. The downtime you mentioned, rental cars, the whole 9 yards. To me, more and more, it's making sense. Hang on to the old cars and learn how to maintain them and replace parts as you need to.
Yeah, they're economic ticking time bombs. In the case that you cite, a replacement transmission from Honda is going to be $5,000 or $6,000.
Mm.
Most people don't have 5 or 6 thousand bucks to pay for that. So what are they going to do? They're going to put it on their credit card and pay 19-20% interest on that. It ends up being more sensible financially to throw the vehicle away and get a new one because the monthly payment is more manageable in a sense, than putting $5,000 at 20% interest on your MasterCard. You've got a car payment for the next 6, 7 years at 0 or 1% interest, and it seems like it's a better deal. The point is, people just can't do it. They can't come up with 5 or 6 thousand bucks, and the manufacturers know that, and the dealers know that. So here you go. We could get you into this new car right here. And I know it sounds sinister, but I think it's the case. That's what they want. I think that they ironically realized the cars, they had reached such a state of development with cars in the 90s and early 2000s. They had gotten so good, so reliable, so durable that unless you just wanted a new car for the sake of, I'd like to have a new car, you didn't need to buy a new car but once every 15 or 20 years. And they don't like that because you're in the time after you pay off the car, and then another 7, 8, 9, 10 years down, you're not paying anything, are you? They want you paying constantly, perpetually. That's the game plan here.
We're all going to become subscribers,
Yes.
right?
I mean,
Well,
literally down to options in the vehicles. They're doing that now. Like Volkswagen got in all kinds of hot water recently because they were going to say, okay, we're going to unlock the power that we've built into the vehicle. It's there, but you can't access it unless you pay us a certain amount of money per month. And BMW was doing the same with heated seats. The hardware was in the car. You had the heating elements that were in the seats and the switches, but they wouldn't work unless you paid BMW a monthly subscription.
man, and they get to act like, well, we generously heard your cries and are responding when you pay us.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
awful. We've gone from an owner society to a serf society. It used to be that average people in this country owned things. They owned cars, they owned land, they owned single family homes. And in that sense, they were richer than the royalty of England in a lot of ways. And now we're gradually being reduced to the status of serfs, who are allowed to eke out an existence at the pleasure of the lord of the manor.
Well, Eric, as always, it's great to have you on. And look, for people looking for general automotive advice and knowledge, you couldn't find a better website than ericpetersautos.com. Thanks again for being on the show. And if you're up to it next week, we'll
Of
fire up the
course.
video again and do this once more.
Sounds great, Brian. Thank you for having me.